Welcome back to Heroes and Patriots, a program about national security, intelligence, and foreign policy. It's 33 minutes past the hour, and we are beginning our second segment of the program with Norman Solomon. Mr. Solomon joins us again, and he is an American journalist, media critic, and anti-war activist. He is the national director of Rootsaction.org and the author of many books, including War Made Easy, How Presidents and Pundits Keep Spinning Us to Death. He was a Bernie Sanders delegate from California to the 2016 and 2020 Democratic National Convention. Norman Solomon, welcome to the program.
Thank you so much. I'm so glad to be on with you.
Thank you. We apologize for the technical difficulties. We were unable to join all three of us on at the same time, so we apologize for that. And we're
no
on a
problem. Glad to be with you this morning.
John.
Here, Norman, I also apologize for not supporting you as congressman in the primary, 8 years ago?
Things get so complicated, and, electoral politics are not always very clean, very straightforward.
Tell our listeners how close you came. Was it 0.1%?
Yeah, something like that to get through the primary. Of course, it has to be said that it would have been a very tough battle because the entire establishment of the North Coast and North Bay was against me. All the newspapers, all the big money, Mike Thompson, even Lynn Woolsey, we're with the quasi-incumbent for the Assembly, Jared Huffman, of course, now is in his, 8th year in Congress or so.
Right. And what kind of a job do you think he's doing? What could he be doing differently? And if you were in Congress right now, would you be pushing for the 25th Amendment, removal of Trump from immediate removal of Trump from office?
Well, first I think Huffman is doing a decent job. If you grade him on a curve, he's probably in the top 15% of the Democrats in Congress, I think, in terms of being progressive. But in terms of fighting the military-industrial complex, I think he's made some improvements. He voted for a 10% cut in the military budget. He voted against the latest military budget. But I think that he could be much stronger in terms of denouncing the entire flow of big money, the billions and billions every week, really, going into weapons when we need health care, housing, education, so many different needs in our district and around the country. And, frankly, in terms of foreign policy, in Honduras and elsewhere where we need a stronger voice to oppose the oligarchy and semi-dictatorships that the U.S. government is part of in terms of support. And definitely a place where there's a need for improvement is support for Palestinian rights. To be unequivocal that we have a single standard of human rights, that we're not going to send billions of dollars in aid and weapons sales and subsidies to the Israeli government when in Gaza and the West Bank, Palestinians are being deprived of their basic human rights. So that's basically how I'd answer the first part of your question. And in terms of the crisis going on right now, any and all fast ways to push for getting rid of this despot, this deranged and anti-democratic president, Donald Trump, invoking the 25th Amendment, yes. Impeachment and pushing for conviction in the Senate, yes. Of course, we have, 2 weeks and less to go, but every day should be a push to dislodge this tyrant from office.
So we were talking with Danny just a moment ago about security, Capitol security. Look at the response. Do a compare and contrast. The response to the Black Lives Matter Antifa movement and the great show of force that law enforcement and the National Guard has to Antifa and Black Lives Matter, but yet security was almost non-existent in the Capitol building yesterday. Danny was saying that if he had a team of well-trained and well-armed private contractors, military contractors, they could have easily taken over and occupied the White House. The Capitol building. They could have blown the Capitol building. They could have kidnapped and held hostage members of Congress. It would have been so easy had that mob, even a few of them, been armed and well trained and well led. Why do you think the almost total lack of security at the Capitol building yesterday?
Well, John, I think there are a couple of key aspects to your very important question. One is the disparity, which is both literal and metaphor. That what we see is that in general, with very few exceptions, when African Americans protest, when supporters of equal rights and those who are protesting to challenge racial injustice, when those protests happen, the chances are much higher that there will be rubber bullets, that the batons will be swinging, that there'll be even live ammunition used. And this is what happens when, as with Black Lives Matter, African Americans and others are protesting to challenge the status quo, not only police brutality, but implicitly the school-to-prison pipeline and the prison industrial complex. And, you know, it's not just the left saying that. It was so blatant, the disparity between last summer and what's happened in the last day on Capitol Hill. CNN has posted and broadcast just the contrast between the use of rubber bullets and other massive violence, including in D.C., from police. And the contrast between that and, as you note, the, at best, lackadaisical security, the lack of violence from police on the whole on Capitol Hill, and even after this tremendous breach of security, this intentional terroristic incursion attack on the Capitol building, afterwards, one might say appropriately, but in great contrast, the police very politely and gently on the whole escorted people down the Capitol steps and off the Capitol grounds. And so the contrast, it is racist and is institutionally a political bias that is deep with many police forces, including the Capitol Police and in terms of the D.C. police. So that's very disturbing. And then in terms of the security, John, I would say that it's just stunning. And I think so many people are taken aback. What you point out is quite correct, both in terms of how easy it would have been. You know, I've been at many demonstrations where we are up against a military lineup with literally hundreds of police in their riot gear, in their military garb, and yet what was done and not done yesterday at the Capitol invited the kind of mayhem and violence that did occur. And as you point out quite correctly, if there had been an even more well-organized attack on the Capitol, it could have killed many people who work inside that building.
Absolutely. It would have been easy peasy. The mob was not armed, the mob was not trained, the mob was not led, and yet they were able just to walk right in and occupy the building. Focusing a little bit more on yesterday's events, we were speaking with Danny about what the consequences and the implications will be for the United States and exceptionalism in the context of yesterday's events. It would seem as if our prevailing foreign policy strategy of exceptionalism has lost a little of the moral high ground, a little of our moral security as we go tell other countries how they should be so much like us and then fight a war to try to make it so. What will the implications be for American exceptionalism?
That's a great question. Some of these issues are starting to percolate up, especially in the last 36 hours or so, and I think they're quite legitimate and important. American exceptionalism has always been a mythology in the sense that the PR is very good. A lot is sunk into it for the United States government. But let's face it, for instance, with 2 million people behind bars at any one time, per capita, we have by far the most imprisonment of any country on the planet, any other nation. And then the U.S., of course, when you really read a book like Howard Zinn's People's History of the United States. You look at the intervention and the overthrow of many legitimately elected governments over the decades by the U.S. government and the CIA and so forth, when we have killed millions of people, literally into the millions when you look at what happened in the last several decades, going back to the mid-20th century, in Vietnam, in Iraq, in Afghanistan. What are we talking about when we say American exceptionalism? Yes, we have a lot to be proud of that people have achieved through organizing, through political activism, through sacrificing, often not only time and effort and personal lives, but one's own life, literally, all the sacrifice. So we have a lot to be proud of in this country, but we also have tremendous injustice that endures, and that goes to economics, it goes to social discrimination. And so let's get off our high horse and start working together with a single standard of human rights, whether we're talking about U.S. foreign policy or in our own country.
And tell our audience how you are helping to make that happen with Rootsaction, Institute for Public Accuracy, and other initiatives that you either started or co-founded.
Yes, I really want to invite everybody listening on the North Coast and online to go to rootsaction.org. You know, we have in our congressional district, which stretches from the Golden Gate up to the Oregon border, we have close to 10,000 people who are now getting the action alerts from rootsaction.org. We have a bit over 1 million nationally who are getting those alerts. And that's about not only informing ourselves about these issues, but doing something, organizing effectively, challenging members of Congress to do the right thing instead of routinely doing the wrong thing. And people can do that by simply going on the web to rootsaction.org. That's R-O-O-T-S, rootsaction.org. And in the top right corner, it takes about 30 seconds on the homepage. Just put in your email address and your zip code. And we've been able to organize on a wide range of issues to bring power from the grassroots. So rootsaction.org I would encourage in terms of learning and taking action. We fought very hard to defeat Donald Trump with our Vote Trump Out campaign. We put in a lot of money, a lot of time in swing states. We helped to defeat Donald Trump. Now we're on to the second part of our Vote Trump Out program, which is to challenge Biden from the grassroots. We're sick of corporate power limiting our possibilities as human beings in this country. We're sick of the environmental degradation, the militarism, the failure to invest in people's well-being. So I really want to invite people to rootsaction.org. And then as you mentioned, John, I also founded the Institute for Public Accuracy, which is a source of information for producers and journalists and also for the public in general.
Yeah, I can't say enough good things about the work you've done. So many of the themes for our show, so much of the content, so many of our guests come directly from the Institute for Public Accuracy, and we want to thank you for that.
We're going to take a call because we're switching back over to Skype. Caller, go ahead with your question.
Yeah. Hello, Norman.
Hi.
No. Yes. Oh, thank you so much for being there. I don't have much on my phone, minutes, whatever. I think it's so important. Your work is so important.
So that was another of your fans, your many, many fans here in the North Coast, Norman.
Thank you.
Yes, let's continue on holding Biden accountable. Again, following up on what we had to speak with Danny Shorson about. As we transition to Biden, we find that here he is, a guy who's been in office for 48 years, and we're going to get more of the same, which is to say more war, more secrecy, more corporate Democrats. Just comment on that briefly for a second, if you will.
And then we have our caller back. So go ahead, Norman.
Yes, I think it's a tremendous challenge because we're encouraged to believe, well, he's coming in, be quiet, don't give him a chance. That's what was said about Bill Clinton when he allowed the Wall Street people to come in and run U.S. economic policy. in his presidency. That's what was said about Barack Obama. And look, from our area, I was elected as a Barack Obama delegate. But let's face it, he turned over policy. He let houses in the North Coast, North Bay, and around the country go underwater while he bailed out the big banks on Wall Street. So the third time, no, we're not going to do this again. We're not going to sit back and let business as corporate usual prevail. And so at Rootsaction, we have launched something called the No Honeymoon campaign. You can see it at the top of rootsaction.org, or you can just go straight to nohoneymoon.org. And we're pushing from the grassroots. We're being very clear and reasonable. We fought to defeat Donald Trump in the general election. Now we're pushing very hard and organizing for a Biden administration that's for peace and social justice instead of helping Wall Street and the military-industrial complex.
Right. And we have that caller back, Norman. We'd like to take that call in the next 6 minutes that we have remaining. Caller, go ahead with your question.
Yes, thank you. Actually, it's a different caller. Norman, I so appreciate everything you do, and especially the discussion on human rights and applying human rights here at home. So I wanted to ask you, what is Rootsaction and your organizing partners doing to change the education system in this country? Because I think what we're seeing with everything happening, and including the electoral process, that we need a different kind of education. And I'm just wondering, recognizing it's state-led and everything, how would you go about doing it, and are you doing it?
Well, I think it's crucial to recognize and fight for the principle that education is a human right. And that means, for one thing, that students should not be going into debt if they want an education. And so one of the 6 pillars of our No Honeymoon campaign on the Biden incoming administration is to cancel student debt across the board. You know, we have this, $1 trillion+ in student debt. It's ridiculous. It's insane. The amount of student debt is just staggering, and it has to be rolled back. And so I think that in that sense, recognizing the human right is there. Now, charter schools, I think, on the whole, have been a disaster. They have undercut public education. We need to put massive funding into public schools, which have just withered on the vine, including here in California. And there are deeper issues, which, we could talk about for hours and I think deserve a lot of discussion. And that is a culture and institutions that see education not just as schooling, because in some sense schools per se have become, let's see, they're not reaching what they claim to do. And schooling, there's a great book, Deschooling Society, by Ivan Illich, which came out decades ago. So long story short, we need to reprioritize and get off the profit system, including for higher education, and get into education as a human right.
Norman, there is quite a wish list that Americans have. Military and more war is certainly not on it, but things like student loan forgiveness, Medicare for all, more public housing, definitely on the list. But here's the problem that I get all the time as a progressive. People ask me all the time, with $26 trillion in national debt, and with the barometers out there, like Bitcoin now selling for what, $32,000 a coin, and gold selling for $2,000 an ounce, with all the indicators out there that we're looking at a possible imminent collapse of the dollar, how can we afford these programs? How would you answer these skeptics?
Yeah, it's a key question, and there are 2 basic answers. One is that we have a lack of truly progressive taxation, and the tax plans that Bernie Sanders, and I was a Bernie Sanders delegate, and Elizabeth Warren have both put forward, taxing the wealthy, a wealth tax, and a transaction tax on Wall Street could raise huge amounts of money. And it actually would take the tax burden off the rest of us to tax the 1% and the 0.01% at a really accelerated rate. It's just obscene to have 3 people have more wealth than the rest of the people in this country, and Gates and so forth, Bezos, having this enormous amount of money, and they're getting away with enormous heists in terms of lack of adequate progressive taxation. And the other is the military-industrial complex. If you add the nuclear weapons budget, the so-called Defense Department budget, and so forth, we're up to over $1 trillion a year. We're several billion dollars a day. And to cut that would mean to free up money for other needs. So it can be done, but this is a political struggle. Who has the power to change the spending and fundraising priorities?
Do you think that we should be breaking up companies like Amazon and Apple and you name it, Google, all the way down the line, that seem to have virtual monopolies in their respective industries?
Absolutely. And, if we are old enough, if we're several decades old, we can remember when the term antitrust was a very common one and was talked about a lot. Antitrust action, it has fallen by the board. It's very rare. It's because of Reaganism. It's because of Clinton and Obama and the Democrats doing a sort of a toned-down version of the same Reaganistic, Thatcheristic approach. We need to break up these big tech companies and these other companies and really revise the whole concept of antitrust.
Well, Norman, we are in the home stretch here with you. We'd love to have you back on. We'd love to do a full hour with you. You're really the go-to guy. You're the quotable quote, but more than that, you have real solutions to real problems. In our final minute, please tell our listeners how they can find out more about you, your books, your movies, War Made Easy, and Rootsaction and the Institute for Public Accuracy.
Well, people are invited to go to normansolomon.com. It's got a lot of that info. Rootsaction.org is really important to go to as activism and information. I think rootsaction.org. And I do want to say that I've been seeing for years now the content, and sometimes I get to listen online to Heroes and Patriots. You folks are doing a great job, not just for KMUD, but for people around the country beyond. So if I was wearing a hat, I would tip the hat to you. And, we're in this together. We've got to create a better world, and I'm glad that we all can be at it every day.
Thank you, Norman.
Thank you. And I want to thank everyone on your team as well, most notably Sam Husseini. We love the work he does on things like the plight of the Palestinians. He's really a wonderful asset.
It's great work. Yeah, and thanks to you both and to everybody listening to make this happen.
You're very welcome. That's our show for today, Heroes and Patriots. We hope to see you tune in next month, the first Thursday of February.
And make it a New Year's resolution to become a member of your community radio station, KMUD. Thank you for listening.